I remember the first time I felt it, this uneasy, gnawing feeling in my gut that something wasn't right with her. And it wasn't some grand, cinematic moment where I caught her in bed with someone else. It was far more subtle, far more insidious. It started with late nights. That's where most people would begin the story, right? The long hours at the office, the work dinners, the phone calls that she'd have to take in private because it was a client who didn't like sharing details openly. But I brushed it all off, told myself that I was overthinking things. After all, wasn't this what I wanted for her? She was building her career, making a name for herself in a cutthroat industry. Hell, I had encouraged it. "I'm just going to be a little late tonight," she'd say, flashing me that smile. The kind of smile that would disarm anyone. Straight brown hair falling neatly to her shoulders, perfectly tailored suits that hugged her figure in all the right places. She looked like the very definition of success. She was success. I used to be proud of that. Then one day, I noticed a shift. The late nights got later. Her work trips became more frequent, but the stories that followed didn't match up. She stopped talking about the stress of her job, stopped sharing the little things like she used to. You could call it intuition, maybe paranoia, but I felt her slipping away. The breaking point came when I found a receipt. It was carelessly left on her desk, tucked under a folder of case notes she must have hurriedly thrown down in a rush to get out the door that morning. At first, I didn't think anything of it, until I saw the price. $3,000. A bracelet. I sat down in her office chair and stared at that receipt, feeling the weight of it in my hands like it was a bomb waiting to go off. I knew it wasn't for me. There was no anniversary, no birthday. Just a random date stamped on the receipt. I couldn't breathe for a moment, my mind racing through every conversation, every excuse, every late night. And then it hit me. She hadn't bought it for herself. It was for him. But who the hell was he? I didn't confront her, not right away. I was smarter than that. I had a law degree, after all, and if I was going to accuse her of something this big, I needed more than just a hunch and a scrap of paper. So, I waited. I watched. And slowly, the pieces started falling into place. She thought she was being careful. But in reality, she was just arrogant. I began my investigation like any good lawyer would, methodical, precise, and under the radar. She didn't know I was looking, didn't even suspect. After all, I was the supportive husband, the one who had always trusted her, never questioned her intentions. But trust, I learned, has an expiration date. The first clue came from her phone. She'd been a little more protective of it lately, keeping it on her at all times, even when she was home. And when I asked about it, she brushed it off as work stuff. But that wasn't the strange part. It was the constant notifications that would light up the screen at odd hours. I was patient, though. I didn't need to see the messages. All I needed was the patterns. Next, I turned my attention to her laptop. She had always been the more tech-savvy one between the two of us, but she didn't expect me to know how to get into her files. A simple keylogger installed when she was out one evening gave me access to everything. It didn't take long to uncover her calendar, an endless series of meetings, most of which matched up with her explanations. Except for a few names that popped up more than once. Names I didn't recognize. One, in particular, stood out, Thomas. At first glance, he seemed like any other client. Wealthy, of course, one of those high-end corporate types who probably spent his free time on yachts or at exclusive country clubs. His name appeared in her calendar too frequently for it to be a coincidence. Twice a week, sometimes more. Not just for meetings but for dinners. Client dinners, she'd say, wearing that confident smile I had once loved. Then I found the emails. They were businesslike at first, nothing out of the ordinary. Contracts, schedules, invoices. But then, a shift. Small compliments slipped into their exchanges. Flirtations disguised as banter. It wasn't overt, she was far too careful for that. But I could read between the lines. Every word between them felt charged with an underlying tension. The kind that starts innocently enough but slowly evolves into something more. I knew the signs. I'd seen it with other clients when I worked cases involving infidelity. The final piece came one evening when she left her work laptop at home by mistake. I knew it was risky to check, but the opportunity was too perfect to ignore. I sat at her desk, my hands trembling slightly as I clicked through her files. And there it was, a dinner reservation, made weeks ago, at a high-end restaurant we'd never been to together. For two. The date? That night. I remember sitting there, staring at the confirmation email, the breath leaving my lungs as everything I had suspected clicked into place. The time had come. I could no longer just watch and wait. I had the proof I needed. That night, when she walked through the door, I pretended not to notice her flushed face, the slight disarray in her otherwise polished appearance. I asked her how her meeting went. She lied with such ease, it almost broke me. But instead of confronting her, I played the part. The loving, unsuspecting husband. I knew I couldn't go after her emotionally. She'd been so careful, so strategic. If I was going to destroy her world the way she was wrecking mine, I needed to do it where it would hurt the most, in court. It was time to make my move. I didn't waste time. As soon as I had the evidence in hand, I began building my case. It's funny, people think betrayal is all about emotion, about tears and rage, but that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is the cold, calculated planning. It's the waiting. The careful assembly of every detail so that, when the time comes, there's no escape. She didn't know it yet, but I was about to make her life hell. As a lawyer, I knew the ins and outs of divorce proceedings. And more importantly, I knew her weaknesses. She had built her career on trust, on a reputation that took years to craft. It wasn't just her job that was on the line, it was her name, her entire identity. If I played this right, I could tear that apart piece by piece. I started by consulting with a close colleague, someone I trusted not to spill anything until the time was right. We reviewed the documents together, the emails, the dinner reservations, the financial statements. There was more than enough to prove infidelity. But I wanted to go beyond that. I wanted to ruin her financially, not just in the divorce but in her entire professional sphere. That's when I dug into her client's business dealings. Thomas, her lover, wasn't just some wealthy playboy, he was deeply involved in several high-profile contracts, some of which had questionable legality. I knew enough about the law to see that this wasn't just an affair between two consenting adults. She was blurring ethical lines, likely covering for him or turning a blind eye to his dealings, all while indulging in their little rendezvous. I couldn't believe how reckless she had been, how easily she'd let him drag her into his mess. And all for what? Some fancy dinners, expensive gifts, and a few stolen nights in hotel suites? It made me sick to my core. But I didn't feel pity for her. If anything, it only fueled my resolve. For weeks, I gathered more evidence. Financial records of gifts that couldn't be explained away. Meetings where she clearly had no professional reason to be. Even a few photos, nothing incriminating, but suggestive enough to raise questions about her professionalism. The irony? She had no idea that I was preparing to turn her life upside down. Each night she came home, smiling as though nothing had changed, still trying to sell me the same lie she'd been peddling for months. And I played along. Every smile she gave me felt like a knife to the gut, but I needed her to believe she was in control. The only place I let myself unravel was in the courtroom. It was strange, standing in front of judges and clients, arguing other people's cases, while my own world was quietly crumbling. But it gave me clarity. I began to see her less as the woman I had loved and more as an opponent, someone I would defeat by any means necessary. It was almost clinical, the way I separated my emotions from the task at hand. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was a challenge. And I was determined to win. Eventually, the day came. I filed for divorce. She was blindsided, of course. I remember the look on her face when the papers were served, a mix of shock, anger, and confusion. But as I stared back at her, I realized something. She had underestimated me. All this time, she had been playing her game, thinking I would never catch on. But she was wrong. Now, she was about to face the consequences. The legal process moved quickly. Once the divorce papers hit her hands, there was no going back. She tried to keep her composure, acting like this was just a misunderstanding, something we could work through. But I wasn't interested in her apologies, or her half-hearted attempts to salvage what she had already destroyed. I knew her game, and I wasn't about to let her win. Not this time. When the reality of what was happening sank in, she did what anyone would, she lawyered up. And she didn't go small, either. She hired one of the top divorce attorneys in the city. It was almost amusing, watching her scramble for damage control, as if she could just throw money at the problem and make it disappear. But I was ready for her. I had been ready for months. Our first meeting in court was icy. We sat across from each other, barely acknowledging the other's presence. Her polished appearance, sleek brown hair, the same tailored suits that once captivated me, now seemed like armor, a shell of professionalism she was clinging to. But I knew what lay beneath. I knew the lies, the betrayal, the secrets she thought she had hidden so well. Her attorney tried to play hardball, pushing for a quick settlement, offering terms that might have been generous if I were a different man, one who still cared. But that wasn't me anymore. I wasn't here to negotiate. I was here to win. And I had no intention of backing down. The courtroom itself felt like a battlefield, cold and sterile, with its polished wood and fluorescent lights humming overhead. It was nothing like the passion and betrayal that had unfolded behind closed doors. The intimacy of her affair, the stolen moments of lust and lies, they didn't belong in this place. Here, it was all strategy, facts, and evidence. And I had plenty of that. Her lawyer thought he could rattle me, but I stayed calm, methodical. I laid out everything, from the affair to the financial discrepancies I had uncovered. The bracelet, the dinners, the unexplained expenses, it was all there, meticulously documented. I watched as the color drained from her face, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of indifference. The worst part? She hadn't just betrayed me. She had put her entire career on the line for a man who clearly didn't give a damn about her. Thomas hadn't shown up in court to support her. No surprise there. Men like him never do. They leave the wreckage behind for someone else to clean up. As the proceedings dragged on, I saw it in her eyes, fear. She realized the full extent of what was happening, that this wasn't just a divorce. This was the systematic dismantling of her life, piece by piece. I could feel the tension between us, thick in the air, like a thread stretched too tight and ready to snap. The more we fought in court, the more I saw just how far she had fallen. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. She had become someone else entirely, someone willing to sacrifice everything for her greed, her ambition, her desires. And in the end, she would pay for it. The final day in court felt different. It was quieter somehow, as if the weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on us both. The courtroom was the same, cold, sterile, emotionless, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. It was almost over. We both knew it. I sat across from her, watching her lawyer shuffle through papers, going over their final arguments. But my eyes were on her. She looked composed, polished as always, but there was something different now. She wasn't as confident. Her suit, perfectly tailored and professional, looked more like a costume than a second skin. The facade was cracking. I knew this would be the last time we'd face each other like this, and yet, it felt far from over. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like this. Not like I thought there would be. I had imagined this moment so many times, the moment I would see her defeated, finally realizing the full extent of the damage she had done. But the truth is, there was no victory here. Only loss. As the lawyers spoke, I found myself drifting back to the beginning. To the times when we were happy. To the woman I thought I knew. It felt like a different lifetime, a different person entirely. The betrayal, the affair, the lies, all of it seemed so far removed from the life we had built together. But it was real. And now, we were paying the price for it. Her lawyer was throwing out one last desperate attempt, trying to minimize the financial damage. But it was pointless. I had her cornered. The evidence was too strong, too damning. There was no escape. She was going to lose everything she had worked for, and she knew it. I could see it in the way she clenched her jaw, her fingers gripping the edge of the table just a little too tightly. I thought, for a moment, that she might look at me, that maybe we'd share one last glance, an acknowledgement of what had happened between us. But she didn't. She kept her eyes forward, focused on the legal battle at hand, refusing to acknowledge the wreckage we had both created. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe there was nothing left to say. The judge would deliver the final verdict soon. Financially, I had already secured a victory, but there was something far deeper at play here. We both knew that this courtroom battle was just the surface of everything that had been shattered. Money, assets, reputation, those were the things we were fighting for on paper. But beneath that was the raw, ugly truth of what we had lost. Trust. Love. The life we had built together. As the lawyers wrapped up their closing statements, the room fell silent. We sat there, just the two of us, separated by a courtroom table but worlds apart. My wife, ex-wife soon, sat across from me, still beautiful, still composed, but utterly changed. We were no longer partners, no longer on the same side. We were enemies now, bound together by a legal fight, but forever separated by what she had done. I wondered if she felt any remorse, any regret for the choices she had made. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I would never know. But as we sat there in that sterile courtroom, waiting for the judge to return, I realized something. The damage was done. No matter what the verdict would be, neither of us would walk away unscathed. The door to the judge's chambers opened. We both straightened in our seats, eyes forward, waiting. The verdict was coming, but the real punishment had already been dealt. And so we waited, side by side but forever apart, knowing that the end was near. What would you do if your partner betrayed you with a client? Would you seek revenge personally or professionally?